So it was 1977. I was 8 years old. So post-Vietnam War. I was growing up in a household where I wasn't protected. And I was actually spotted as an unprotected child and abducted by a man, a white American man, who took me out of the country. And again, 1977, there wasn't even child protective services in place in most states in the United States at that time. So people ask, how did he get you out of the country? And I say, quite easily. And so when I became conscious, I didn't know that I was in the middle of a civil war, and it was the height of the Rhodesian Civil War. Rhodesia is now Zimbabwe. And so my life was in extreme danger from this abductor. He was psychopath and really had the potential to kill me at any moment. And so he assaulted me, broke my ribs, and I thought that was going to be my crossing. And I was literally praying to the angels to come get me because I was so exhausted and disappointed and fatigued from all the hard experiences I had up until that point in my life at 8 years old. But the angel came down and told me, it's not your time. And I said, I want a new angel, because don't you see how bad this is down here? So I did survive that. I was hospitalized. And again, I'm going to make it the short version because I've actually written my book. So it's all, I'll show you the cover, Loving Bravely. So all the detail is here. So I'm going to try not to do too much of a spoiler. And so I was immersed in this war. I ended up being picked up by some very dangerous soldiers. One of those soldiers chose to take me to a village that he thought might take me in and give me some shelter. And so he dropped me off in the bush by myself. In the morning, I made my way to the people of this village. And this is the part that I really want to get across to people, that they didn't have to take me in. You know, I was not of their nationality, I was not of their race, I didn't speak their language, but they chose to give me shelter, to give me water and food, and two women in particular really chose to give me loving and mothering. And so I really want to bring that home for people, because a big part of why I share my death experiences is to share the love, because so many people are needing more feminine nurturing, more mothering in the world. So when the woman who kind of became my mama, when she was taking me in, of course I was a very defended child, and I was afraid of anybody hurting me, but she sang to me. And it's through this singing that I began to melt some of my high defendedness. So my singing is different than hers, but I'm going to try to deliver some of the love that she gave to me to you all. And the invitation is to let this sink into the places inside you that need to be seen, that need to have somebody say, you are loved, you are real, you matter. So imagine again, I'm this desperate, barely alive 8-year-old, and she's singing to me in this potent, dignified, loving way. And so I literally collapse in her arms. And I think this is my new life, living with these people, and they start teaching me the ways of planting in the ground, harvesting food, doing ceremony. And I don't understand the magnitude of the danger that we are in this civil war. And so what's true is that it's a very complex civil war. There's 3 factions. And that if people, civilians, rural people, didn't agree with some of the more extreme side, they were considered the enemy and attacked. So one day I wandered too close to an area where, unbeknownst to me, a battle was starting to happen. And so to me it was a positive place. It was a creek where the women had put clay on my assaulted, bruised ribs, and they asked me to sing with them. And when I could sing with them, they considered that I was going to be well, that singing, that moving, that dancing is part of human resilience. And so that was the medicine of how they helped me heal the trauma of having been abducted and assaulted, is to sing with them. So again, I'm just going to put as much singing as I can in here. Shumneam, oh, I. So singing to people's strength, to people's resilience, and that so many people have made it through hardship, and not always have we been given a moment of recognition. So that's what I'm pausing and doing right now, is honoring all the hard things that each of us have lived through, the losses, the disappointments, the betrayals, the places where that which we thought was stable is broken in pieces in front of us. And so breathing in, breathing out your dignity, your resilience. So returning to my story, again, I was by this creek that was a positive place for me, and there was a soldier, and he was scouting the perimeter. And when he spotted me, a child by myself, obviously I had no defense, no weapon, and he immediately pulled up his gun. And when his gun barrel became just a circle, I knew this is my last moment alive. This is my last breath. And in my heart, I was begging him for mercy. But now I understand the generational context, that mercy wasn't available in his heart, and that it was immediate, that he was so close I could see his finger on the trigger. He pulled the trigger, and I heard the gun go off, and the bullet scraped and grazed the top of my head. I got slammed down to the ground, and I began to die of blood loss. I crossed over into a very loving, gentle, supportive, and totally guided place. And so the first beings who touched me on the other side were these very feminine beings. And I now understand it was the 2 women who mothered me in the village. They were still alive at the time. So that raises all kinds of interesting questions about, is part of us already on the other side? So they guided me. I ended up going through to another guide who guided me through some of what I call my dark cave. And in order to go forward and reunite with what I call the Great Heart, the being that sung me into presence, sung my life into being, I needed to purify all the beliefs where I thought that I wasn't good enough, and that I thought the abuse that had happened to me was my fault. So this guide in my dark cave helped me address, to sit with all those difficult emotions that happened in my 8 years of being alive. And so that purified me to go on, and other beings kept literally passing through me, taking away any shame, taking any misconception that I was unworthy or something was wrong with me. So again, I'm going to sing to that. Any place that listeners have where there's shame, where there's embarrassment for not being able to be perfect or be what other people expected. So healing that shame into knowing that the Creator made you just as you are. Shune ayam ho I ahie showo hey I am nam hey yo. And may that singing increase your self-acceptance, just like I experienced when I was on the other side. And so I had the opportunity to get closer and closer to the Great Heart, again, the source that created me. And I was getting ready to merge back home, to be a drop in the ocean of goodness, of spiritual source. And just before I was ready to merge, I heard singing. And I turned my attention backwards in the tunnel where I had come from this earthly realm. And my mama had found my body. She was stopping the blood flow on my head. And she had changed her wailing into singing. And then she called on the ancestors in the land to sing a calling song so potent that it was attempting to call me back. And what happened in this critical turning point is that when I heard their calling song, I remembered I had not yet done my purpose, which was to sing to others, to call them through their trauma resolution, to call them through their shame back to their wholeness, just as she was doing for me. So I had a choice. I could continue on to the Great Heart, and I'm going to lean and show you some of my art behind me, so that tunnel, that place where we can reunite with Source. Or I could turn around and come back to this lifetime. And I chose to come back to sing. And here's where I'm going to slow down and really emphasize what it was like to turn around and head back towards life. And so first I was heading back from this etheric, soft, loving place and starting to return to my body that of course was so injured. And I started to regret my choice. But I met a being, and again in my 8 years old, I met beings as I could receive them. And so this being I met, and she had a cat, a golden cougar face. And she told me, we have so much art that when you are safe, and this will take a long time before you are safe, we are going to give you art image after image so that you can draw things to help yourself and others remember their belonging in the web of life, that they are created by original source, and that creation comes from goodness. So she reassured me that someday I would be safe, and someday they would begin to give me all this art. And again, this is my art printed on a towel behind me. And I continued on, and there I was at the border between the living and the dead, the final veil. So again, kind of if we keep going out in these veils, I was at the final veil, ready to return home. And there I met what I call the grandmother of all of us, the original mother. And her skin was black, and her eyes were all colors. So she just kept shifting. And she sang to me as if I was a cathedral. And she was singing this song of prayer, this song of celebration, saying, I'm so glad you were created, and I'm so glad you're returning back to life. So I'm going to sing again to everyone who's listening, who maybe didn't get the proper cherishing when they were born. Maybe your parents were tired or confused, or there was generational stuckness or trauma, and people around you didn't know how to celebrate you coming into this lifetime. So I'm singing to that, to heal that. Shwei, Shoei-yo, shoei-am, ay-ay-yo, shoei-ai, shoei-yo, shoei-am, yeah-yo. So with that, the final veil opened. I came back to my body. My mama was holding on to me. She helped me feel more solid. The people of the village that I was in sang prayers to get the hatred off the bullet that grazed my head, so I wouldn't go through life with resentment. And so that someday I could understand the whole context of why these intense experiences happened, and the historical context and my karmic context of why I went from being a white American born on the East Coast to the unusual circumstances that landed me in a place where I received mothering from these women, and that also several men took the risk to protect and save my life. And they didn't have to do this. So part of why I wrote the book, Loving Bravely, is to honor the people who took the risk. And so I'm singing a hymn of praise. And I made sure, as in the writing, it took me 16 years to write this book, that I wrote all the parts where they loved me so slow, so rich, so it could be like instructions on how to receive love. And I wrote the intense trauma parts as simply and gently as I could, because I wanted it to be friendly to other trauma survivors. And so I don't go for shock value, I don't go for gruesome value, I go for what is loving kindness that can come off the page and meet the many people who could use some more compassion in their lives, who could use some reminder of how to take good care of themselves with self-compassion. So the next parts that happened that are quite tragic are that the soldiers came back, attacked the village. When I was running to escape the second attack, I had just been shot 2 days before. I still had died of blood loss, so I was incredibly weak. So I didn't make it very far in trying to escape before I fell face down in the sand and crossed over again. And this death experience was quite different. And again, it's I want to really share kind of the essential nuggets of it. And that this being I met, I called him God of mountains become beaches, because he showed me that he could create the mountains, he could also destroy them in slides, grain by grain, and that his key message to me, again, after I had just experienced a massacre, that out of destruction comes new creation, meaning that which we thought was solid, like a mountain, can be taken apart over time, grain by grain, and it makes the beach. So when we think it's the dark night of our soul, when we are convinced we can't go on, those are the times that something might be broken open to send us in a new direction, that we might have been thrown 100 miles off the route we thought we were on, the way we thought our life was going to unfold. And that when we stand up again in our resilience, in our dignity, then we begin again. That is the definition of resilience, is taking stock what we've lost and looking around for what we do have, which might just be resilience inside of ourselves. And I'm going to sing again to honoring our ability to stand up again. Shoei, hi, om nayam, hey yo. So this being that I now understand to be Shiva. He returned me to my body, and I didn't want to live, but he commanded me to live. And so he literally commanded me to crawl forward to get away from the massacre. And he had the plan, and so he commanded me to crawl to a place that was a well. So in the morning, somebody else would come to gather water. And I now know, since I've been back twice to Zimbabwe, that this woman's name was Mia Lucy, which means mother of Lucy. And she found me half dead. She washed the blood off my face. She put me on her back as if I was her own child. She took me back to her homestead. And when a neighbor saw she had a wounded white child, they said, "Don't bother with her, it's too dangerous." And she said, and this is why I am alive, "I will not throw her away. She's a living human being." And so again, everything I do is to honor the loving, bravely courage of the people who chose to save my life during war. And in my research, about 24,000 civilians died in this war. And the reason I am not one of them is because of their choice to take me in. And I've been back, again, like I said twice, like 40 years after the war. And I've been able to find people who remember me. And they all say, your chances of survival, a white child alone in that war, are nothing. But it's God's grace that you are still here with us. So again, just honoring everybody's ways of surviving, and especially honoring people who have taken the risk to reach out and help somebody who maybe wasn't part of their family, wasn't part of their kin, but went beyond separation, beyond familiarity. Because the people who saved people's lives during the Holocaust, they said it didn't matter that they weren't part of my family, part of my religion, that they were a human being. And that's why I gave them shelter during the Holocaust. So whatever small act, whatever continuous act, whatever momentary act we can do to spread generosity of giving each other shelter, saying, "I see you," with a look of warmth, a smile, truly can change lives. And that's, again, my big message of what are the ways we can be kinder to ourselves? Because if we weren't taken care of as children, if we were abandoned, neglected, assaulted, oppressed, it is 10 times more important that we take good care of ourselves as an adult, through how we eat, through who we spend time with, for how much we get out in nature, how much we move our body, and that attending to our nervous system health, our adrenal health, that we're the ones who are in charge to make this big shift of not passing on trauma, but resolving it here, letting the generational trauma stop here by committing to taking responsibility for our lives, for our emotional states, and for our physical health. So I will pause there and let you continue the conversation.
I find it so remarkable that these people that did not know you were very different from them, chose to help you, which is very difficult to do, especially as they were in the middle of a war. So, it's a fight or flight kind of a situation. You're focusing on protecting yourself, protecting your family, and yet so many people have found it in their heart to try their best to shelter you and to save your life. When you looked nothing like them, you probably did not understand each other with words, and you were just a child. So I think it's impressive, how much we can find humanity everywhere, and it doesn't matter where you're from or where we're going. But I also find it quite remarkable that, you know, you were a small child, so you must have been terrified from beginning to end. It must have been horrendous, and yet you focus a lot on the loving that was shown to you, and the protection that you were given, instead of, you know, the lesser nice parts of your experience.
And it took decades to get where I am now, and that my 20s into my 30s, that's kind of all I did. I didn't actually have a lot of fun. I didn't have a regular 20-year-old kind of freestyle life. I just went to therapy, and I went to inpatient trauma treatment programs, and I got body work. I did yoga. I tried to recover my adrenal health. So where I'm at now, like right now I'm 55, and so what you're seeing, how I present, the ability to sing, the ability to move in my body, feel joy, do art, it took devoted years of just doing trauma resolution. So if you talked to me when I was 25, I was angry, and I was so full of stress and cortisol. My body was in pain a lot. So I just want to honor every person's journey along the way. And once I got to a certain point at about 35 years old in my own trauma resolution, I really wanted to turn that around and give back. Because the ultimate, in my opinion, the ultimate act of coming full circle in our own trauma is giving back to others. Because it's healing to us to feel the agency of, now I have something to serve. Whatever that looks like, community service, running groups, quiet, being the cook in the kitchen at a youth troubled home, whatever it is, whether it's up front and public like I am, or whether it's behind the scenes, the sooner you're able, even when you're not done. Like at 35, I went to massage school, I started getting trauma resolution training to help others, and I wasn't done my process by any means, but I still was able to turn around and give back. I became a craniopsychotherapist, and I really cultivated the gifts I have been given, which my intuition was broken open after the war in Africa. I actually had several more death experiences from assault and from the stress of so much abuse. My body just literally was shutting down and going into parasympathetic shock. And in my teen years, like the post-traumatic stress was just exploding in my body and my nervous system. So wherever people are in their, whether they haven't started in their trauma resolution, whether they're still living the post-traumatic stress symptoms, that even a breath in and a breath out can be medicine. And that we didn't experience the trauma alone. Unless it was a natural disaster, most of the time people's trauma is from other people. And it's from, unfortunately, a lot of times their caregivers. So while our trust might be incredibly damaged, the key to healing is to find people that you do feel good with and do your resolution work with other people in community. And so that's again why I love to offer groups. I do work with people to help them in their trauma resolution, and I love helping other near-death experiencers integrate the experience, because it's a lot to integrate. For those of us who had it as a child and then had to repress it, it might take many years. For me, I went back to Zimbabwe 40 years after the war, because that's when I was ready. I couldn't really have gone any sooner. So whatever methodologies of healing, of taking responsibility for your life, that is the key to freedom, to creative health, to joy. And a lot of people might have heard of the ACEs score, which is an indicator of how much adverse childhood experience we had. And obviously there's studies that that show if people don't do their trauma resolution, then it's more likely that they have diabetes, heart attacks, die sooner, have all kinds of stress-related illnesses. So again, that's my loving invitation to take your next step forward. And what I want to say too is that talk therapy isn't for everyone. Either it's not your culture, or it's out of the price reach. So that's why community dance, drumming, doing art, there's peer support groups, there's 12-step groups. So if it's small, if it's big, your invitation to take your next step in your journey of healing. And, the truth is it's long and hard depending on the amount of trauma you had. And it's entirely worth it.
Oh, absolutely. One thing that I don't quite understand about your time in Africa is why would someone kidnap an American child in the US and take them to Africa? Did that happen regularly at that time? And what was the purpose of it? What was their intention?
Mm-hmm. So first thing I want to say is that those of us who are reasonably mentally well won't really understand the thought process of a psychopath. So that's the first premise. And so I asked the same questions, and it was a lot of source of pain about why was I abducted? So I'm just going to answer first on a karmic level. So from a karmic level, I have had many readings that I have more lifetimes in a tribal context than I have in kind of like a more urban context. So I believe my soul was already with the people of this village. So the crazy circumstances that reunited me with them was what I think my karma. And then my karma is to be the storyteller. So as best as I know from my research and my going back, all of them died in that first village. And so Shiva has told me, it's your kind of privilege to tell the story of their love. And so that's again why, I'm a white American who was in these unusual circumstances, and I have the privilege to be able to write a book and to get it published. And so, otherwise a lot of them wouldn't be known or spoken of in a way that other people could find. So on a worldly level, about why did this happen? So the Vietnam War happened, and the Rhodesian War was just a little bit later. And so the amount of child abduction in both of those wars was incredibly huge numbers. And that in the Rhodesian War, abducting a white girl was a war strategy. And because then it would make the white people, the white colonizers, leave the country, because if their children weren't safe, then they were motivated to leave. In the Vietnam War, not only did lots of child abduction happen, but also a lot of the white American soldiers fathered a child with Vietnamese women, whether consensual or not, meaning like assault or not. And so I believe the abductor fathered a child there, and then they had to, when they got sent back to the U.S., they had to leave that child behind. So what he kept saying to me was, why can't you be more like her? And so I think in his mind he was kind of getting a daughter to replace the daughter he had to leave behind. Again, I don't think he had thought it through. He was just kind of I'm going to go back to war, therefore I'm going to get a daughter to take me back to war. Meaning that he took me with him on the flight. Again, my research is that his training was about 5 to 7 days before he had to go into the field, and so he just gave me to another man. I don't think he thought it through about what am I going to do with her once I have to go into the field. So he just gave me to another man, and then that man left me in the bush, and that's when I was found by the other soldiers. So the key to understand that can be hard for non-war survivors is understanding the magnitude of the chaos that happens in war. And so when I was writing the book, this 24-hour time period, so much intense activity happened that is 5 chapters of the whole book, and within 24 hours. And so those who have been through something that's on an epic scale, like a hurricane or, God forbid, a shooting, you understand that in 5 minutes, your entire world can change. And so war is a context where every 5 minutes, everything can be turned upside down. So when people are trying to understand from a situation of not having been through something like that, it can seem like, how could this possibly happen? But when I went back to Zimbabwe, everybody there said, oh, this makes perfect sense, that all of this happened to you, and that the chaos of, being tossed from one person to another in these situations, and that it's, we can live or die in a moment in these chaotic situations. So I believe it's divine source so that I could come back and create the art and deliver a message of we can be good to each other even in war. We can be good to each other through race relations. We can cultivate equality by giving experiences of belonging. So again, each moment that we can even make eye contact with somebody who maybe is outcasted, just to say, I see your humanity, that is loving bravely.
You have such a beautiful message, and to me, hearing this side of war it opens up a new perspective. Because usually, for instance, we have wars going on in our world now, and we tend to hear who attacked what, the victims. You get this sort of digest version of what happened. But rarely do we ever get to know of these details, like, for instance, child abductions. The suffering, we assume suffering happened, but those day by day or hour by hour activities that happen are so unknown to us that it's, on the one hand, I think it's a blessing, because I think it would traumatize us to know everything that goes on in a war. And on the other hand, I think we're just oblivious to these dark things that could be happening to almost anybody at any given time.
Mm-hmm. And again, that's the beauty of sharing these, is giving hope. Like, again, I wrote this book to be of service to my brother and sister war survivors. And, whether that's this lifetime or our ancestors, and everybody who just needs more compassion in the world. And I want to move to also that the things that get opened in people when they go through something that's beyond the normal human experience, that we can find out what we're made of. And so speaking about these things is incredibly important to the integration and the transformation. So for me, intuition got opened. And so I use that to be of service to others. And so the intuition, and again, the further I went in emptying my nervous system of trauma, the more space there was for my brain, my being, my senses to read intuitively. And so mine works that I don't see auras or angels, but I see biology. I see people's organs. I see people's emotional history in relation to their physical state. And so I work with people about like when I very first started kind of realizing that, I could look at people and see, oh, in this area of your body, there's still that fear of, when your dad lost his job and the family was really not able to have enough food. And so at a certain point I said, well, I need more anatomy and biology and physiology training to understand how does that show up as far as a disease process or a health risk for people. So that's really the emphasis of my training, is the neurobiology of trauma resolution. And I also at a certain point really started looking for people's strengths and gifts, like what are people's brilliances? Like, that's super fun. Sometimes I'll see a teenager and just see what an incredible leadership potential they have. And I can just see inside their mind how unique their thinking is to bring together two things in the world that have never been combined, and how that's going to be of service to their community. So shifting our nervous system to look for the good and not just scanning the horizon looking for danger. And that's the beauty of trauma resolution. And again, my early art was all just kind of dumping trauma out of my body so it wasn't in my cells. And a bunch of it's not very pretty. And then at a certain point, it started to not be about my story, but about the collective story, and about the ways that we interweave and into the golden web of life, and that I could bring forward the positive of my near-death experiences. And again, most of us near-deathers, we want to have people who haven't had a death experience, get the benefit of the difficulty that ended up opening the beauty. I don't recommend being shot. I don't recommend being in a car accident. I recommend meditation. I recommend Tai Chi, dropping into all kinds of spiritual practices that deepen you into sensation and embodiment. I'm not a huge fan of things that are just ascension, because for trauma survivors, that can be an excuse to dissociate, to disconnect. So I'm a huge fan of like all kinds of things that help you come home to your organs, to your heart, to your breath.
So you've spoken a lot about the time that it has taken you to work through the trauma and to be able to integrate not just a near-death experience, but everything that happened, and coming back and trying to make sense of it and working to being able to move forward with your life. You've also mentioned that it took you 16 years to write the book. And I know writing a book is not only a difficult and painful process, but in order to write those events and recall your memories with accuracy, you need to tap into moments where 8-year-old you was extremely scared and horrified. How did that process work for you, and how did you manage to not give into those feelings again when you had to resurface them in the process of writing?
Mm-hmm. So again, the beginning was not a pretty process at all. I thought I was just going to write a couple pages that were going to go into another book. And I gave those couple of pages to a person who really invested a lot of years in helping me write the book. And he said, "Tell us more. This is important, but you haven't told us the emotion." And again, I'm always loving encouraging other people's gifts and creative process. So if you think it's a short project and it's going to take you a little bit, I thought maybe it would take me a year. At 5 years, somebody asked me, "When are you going to be done?" I'm like, "I think another year." And staying with it, staying when it's a mess, just staying with it, because it started out as 7 pages. And then this person asked me for more, and it became 15 pages. And then it became 46 pages. And then I started giving it out to other people. And so again, I involved so many people in the process of writing this book. And I just want to say too, it's on audiobook that I did the narration, and I sing in the audiobook. And the physical book has my visual art in it. And so in the process, I gave it out to about 45 beta readers. And so beta readers refers to people who are just going to give you feedback even though they know it's not a polished book. And so I gave it to people who would praise it. I gave it to people who would tell me what wasn't working. I gave it to people who would just ask me, "Did someone bathe you?" And And so the book got written by people asking me questions, by people interviewing me, like, really, what happened with this being in your near death that was different than the first being you met? So I gave it to I had about 9 professional editors. So honestly, it cost me a lot. I really invested a great deal in this book and the audiobook and the artwork, but it's my life's work. It's my thank you to the people who saved my life, and it's the paying forward, and the feedback I've been getting is so humbling. People have told me one person told me it's the most important book that they will have read in their life. And I just have to pause and say the 16 years were worth it. So if you've set aside your book, and it's the ultimate, if you decide you're just writing it for yourself and maybe for a few people and you want to keep it private, that's fine. If you decide, like me, that this is public and that this is of service to many people that I'll never even meet. One person wrote to me from Siberia and said, "Your voice has made it all the way here to Siberia, and I feel the potency of your healing here." So when I get that kind of feedback, that kind of encouragement, that kind of invitation to keep doing more, like I've recorded my singing medicine. I have a music album out called Roots Drinking Rain. And again, it's to deliver love through my voice to people. And it's not for everyone, but for those it means something to, for those who it lands to, I get really strong feedback about what it means to them and their healing and their embodiment and their decreasing their shame and increasing their dignity.
And who is this book for when you were writing it? Who did you write it for? And what was the core message that you wanted to convey to them?
Mm-hmm. I wrote it for everyone who needs mothering. I wrote it for everyone who needs a role model that you can rise up, that your innate human quality to be flattened and stand up again is there. And I wrote it for people who live in a place that's oppressive and that they can just kind of take this book off somewhere that nobody else is maybe going to know, and it's going to give them validation of their strength. And again, I wrote the trauma parts as gently as possible. So, wherever people are, and the beauty of an ebook, of course, is that people can translate it to read it in their language. So I wrote it for people who don't have community, to be able to kind of vicariously have the community that I did rise off the page and be loving to them. Because we have so many negative role models of how people use power. There's nothing wrong with power itself, but when we have so many thousands of huge role models of people misusing power, then power and abuse gets coupled together. And so let's uncouple those two things and have more stories of people using their power in a good way. Because, I'm not a huge physical person. I'm a woman who is in my power. I gave a craniosacral session to a young man once who had, he had many concussions because he had done, he was a fire jumper, which means they dropped them from a plane and they jumped right into the fire and worked to put the fire out. So he said, "Robin, I have had very strong male role models of men in command, and that is one kind of power. But," he said, "receiving these sessions from you and treating all my concussions and my nervous system," he said, "you have a power that's entirely different than these men in command." So, if you're a feminine person, if you're a small-bodied person, if you're a person who's experienced oppression, you are powerful. And I'm going to sing right now to that power. Show hey yo, he And the time of playing small is a luxury we can't afford anymore. That we need people to show up in their power, show up in their strength, to clear out what you need to clear so your voice can come to the table. And even if there's still oppression barriers along the way, then be with the people who are safe. Be with the community where your voice isn't oppressed, so that you can build up strength in safety, and then you can choose what you do with your creative expression, with your abilities to organize. Whatever your gift is, we need it now.
It's a very beautiful message to end on, and I think your book is very much what we need right now. It's definitely something that we should all be reading and learning from, because I think we could all use more nurturing. We can all use, more community in our lives, especially nowadays where it feels like we're as divided as can be, according to the media at least. So Robin, for everybody that wants to get in touch with you or find out more about your art, your book, your sessions, how can they get in touch with you and how can they find your work?
Thanks for asking, Sabrina. So my website is my name, robinlandsong.com, and there's 5-person groups. Right now I have individual sessions. I have classes on generational healing, embodiment, creativity, and also I'm so excited. We're making more and more of my art available, and I want to make it affordable for people and usable for people. So there's towels and blankets and sweatshirts, and there are prints too for those who do want to have a print on your wall. And so that is a lovely way to help me out also as an artist and a professional intuitive and healer, because like I say, I spent quite a bit of money making this, which was a totally strong choice that I made to invest in the world and goodness in the world. So I would love your support through buying my art, and I would love to work with people who are really ready to take their next step, even if you don't know how to heal. That's what I help people with, is how do I take my next step in my self-care, my self-compassion, and my freeing up my nervous system so you're capable of more health and freedom. So again, robinlandsong.com, and you can also look me up on Facebook and Instagram, and I have lots and lots of YouTube videos. So if people aren't able to afford a session, you can go through my YouTube videos and get lots of learning and teachings that way also.